The crystalline walls of the Kefmarin High Command trembled as Admiral Vexthyra slammed her six-fingered fist against the strategic display. Red tactical markers swarmed across the holographic representation of the Sol system like digital wasps, each one representing a human defensive position that had held for another impossible day. 17 months, she hissed, her serpentine neck coiling with frustration. 17 months since we began the cleansing of this pathetic backwater system, and still these mammals resist. The War Council chamber fell silent except for the rhythmic pulsing of bioluminescent panels that lined the organic walls. 36 species had joined the hegemony's crusade against humanity. The shark-like Krell, the insectoid Nyx, the energy beings known as the Velmari. All had expected Earth to fall within weeks. All had been wrong. Captain Zolthik of the Nyx clicked his mandibles nervously. Perhaps we underestimated their defensive capabilities, Admiral. Their orbital platforms have repelled every assault. Wave weave. Silence. Vexthyra's triple-jointed legs carried her across the chamber with predatory grace. I have commanded fleets that shattered the crystal cities of Andromeda. I have burned entire sectors to cosmic dust. These humans are nothing more than barely evolved primates with crude fusion reactors and kinetic weapons. They should have surrendered after we destroyed their first colony world. But they hadn't surrendered, not when the hegemony's dreadnoughts had glassed New Brasilia, turning 300 million colonists to ash in a matter of hours. Not when the siege fleets had surrounded Earth itself, cutting off all supply lines and trade routes. Not even when the systematic bombardment of their outer system installations had claimed millions more lives. Instead, the humans had done something that puzzled every strategic algorithm in the hegemony database. They had adapted. War Captain Murden of the Krell delegation spoke, his voice a low rumble that vibrated through the chamber's organic structure. My hunters report disturbing developments. Admiral, the human combat patterns have evolved. They no longer engage in direct confrontation. They strike at our supply lines, disable our scouts, then vanish into asteroid fields and nebular clouds. Vexthyra's inner eyelids flicked with annoyance. The Krell were apex predators from a high-gravity ocean world, bred for millennia to be the perfect warriors. If they were reporting concerns about human tactics, the situation was more troubling than she'd admitted. Show me, she commanded. The tactical display shifted, revealing the latest battle reports. Human ships, if they could even be called ships, had begun appearing throughout hegemony space. Converted mining vessels, refitted civilian transports, even repurposed garbage scows, all bristling with improvised weapons and armor plating. They struck without warning, disabled critical systems, captured supplies, then disappeared before reinforcements could arrive. Most unsettling of all was their patience. Other species fought with desperation or fury. The humans seemed to be playing a different game entirely, one measured not in battles won or lost, but in time itself. Their bleedingness, Vexthyra realized, her voice barely above a whisper. Every day we remain in this system, every ship we lose to their raids, every ton of fuel and ammunition we expend, they're making us pay a price. The assembled War Council shifted uncomfortably. The hegemony had conquered 4 to 7 worlds through overwhelming force and terror. They had never encountered a species that seemed willing to accept massive casualties, while methodically dismantling their enemies piece by piece. On the central display, Earth continued its slow rotation, blue and white and defiant, surrounded by the countless lights of human defensive stations. Somewhere in that orbital maze, 5 billion humans waited with infinite patience for the hegemony to make its next mistake. Admiral Vexthyra stared at the planet that refused to die, and for the first time in her military career, she wondered if she was facing an enemy that couldn't be broken. She would soon discover that humanity's greatest weapon wasn't their technology or their courage. It was their absolute willingness to wait for the perfect moment to remind the galaxy why Earth had never been conquered. The ambush came 3 days later, in the asteroid belt between Mars and Jupiter, where the hegemony supply convoy believed itself safe. Captain Rourke Brennan watched through the viewports of his converted or holler Defiance Edge as the alien dreadnought Silthara moved through the debris field like a metallic leviathan. Its escort of 12 frigates spread in a defensive formation that would have been perfect against any conventional naval force. Humanity was no longer conventional. Contact, whispered Lieutenant Commander Yuki Nakamura from the sensor station. IFF confirms target package. Hegemony heavy cruiser, 6 destroyer escorts, supply tender carrying antimatter reserves. Brennan's weathered face remained impassive as he studied the tactical display. At 62, he was old for a frontline commander, but the siege of Earth had promoted survivors rather than heroes. The scars across his left temple were souvenirs from the Battle of Titan, where his previous ship had been cut in half by Krell plasma cannons. He'd learned patience in those burning corridors, waiting 17 hours in a damaged escape pod while alien hunters swept the debris field. Around him, Wolfpack positions, he asked quietly. Horizon's Fury is in position at coordinates 7-7-Mark-4. Nakamura reported. Stubborn Truth has magnetic anchors deployed at 9-1-Mark-8. Last Stand confirms ready at -Mark-6. For converted civilian vessels against a hegemony battle group, the odds would have been laughable if they weren't so desperate. But Brennan and his crews had learned to fight like the asteroids, themselves silent, patient, and utterly lethal when they moved. Signal the pack. Execute Revelation Protocol in Mark. The first indication the hegemony had of trouble was when the asteroid at bearing to -7-Mark for suddenly sprouted weapon emplacements and began firing. The Stubborn Truth, camouflaged with adaptive hull plating and debris nets, unleashed a barrage of nuclear-tipped kinetic rounds that punched through the leading destroyer's shields and opened its hull to vacuum. The alien response was immediate and overwhelming. The dreadnought's main batteries swiveled toward the apparent threat. 20-meter beams of coherent plasma turning the asteroid into molten slag in seconds. The escort frigates spread into attack formation, their sensors sweeping for additional threats. They never saw the second phase coming. Defiant's edge detached from the asteroid it had been magnetically clamped to for 6 hours, its engines flaring to life as it accelerated toward the supply tender. Brennan felt the familiar weight of 8 gravities crushing him into his command chair as the ship's modified fusion drive pushed them past safe operational limits. Incoming fire, Nakamura called out as hegemony point defense systems locked onto their approach vector. The bridge shook as plasma bolts scorched their improvised armor plating, but the humans had learned to build their ships like medieval castles, layers of redundant systems. Behind meters of steel and ceramic composite, Horizon's Fury engaging, came the voice of Captain Alexander Volkov over the comm. His ship erupted from a cloud of metallic chaff, missile tubes spitting dozens of warheads toward the alien formation. Half were destroyed by defensive fire, but the survivors detonated in brilliant nuclear flowers that overwhelmed enemy sensors and created perfect cover for the final assault. Brennan's ship slammed into the hegemony tender with the force of a falling mountain. Shape charges blew through the alien hull as boarding teams led by Sergeant Major Elena Vasquez poured through the breach. The fighting was vicious and close human assault rifles against Nixstar cutting blades, fragmentation grenades against Krell bioacid sprayers. But the humans had spent 17 months learning how aliens died. Vasquez's voice crackled over. The tactical network, cargo base secured, antimatter reserves intact, transferring to our hulls now. The hegemony dreadnought was turning, its massive bulk swinging toward the human raiders like an avalanche in slow motion. Brennan watched the tactical display and counted seconds they had perhaps 90 before those main guns could target his ship directly. All teams, execute withdrawal. Tango 7 pattern, scatter and regroup at Rally Point Bravo. Last Stand had saved its surprise for this moment. The ship's entire superstructure split open like a flowering bud, revealing dozens of mining charges that had been jury-rigged into improvised torpedoes. They streaked toward the dreadnought's engines at significant fractions of light speed, forcing the alien captain to choose between pursuing the raiders and defending his own ship. He chose wrong. The mining charges, each carrying enough explosive force to crack an asteroid, detonated against the dreadnought's drive section in a chain reaction that lit up the asteroid belt. Like a second sun, the massive ship lurched, its pursuit vector shifting as damaged engines failed and power systems overloaded. By the time the hegemony reinforcements arrived, they found only debris and radiation. The human raiders had vanished into the depths of space, leaving behind the burning hulk of a supply tender and the first real proof that Earth's children were no longer merely defending. They were hunting. Admiral Vexthyra would receive the battle report 6 hours later, and for the first time, she would begin to understand what humanity had been doing. During 17 months of apparent defeat, they had been learning to kill gods. The neural interface burned like liquid fire as Admiral Vexthyra downloaded the tactical reports from the asteroid belt engagement. Her consciousness merged temporarily with the hegemony's central intelligence network, absorbing casualty figures and strategic analyses that painted an increasingly disturbing picture. 12 major supply convoys attacked in the past month. 17 scouting vessels simply vanished without distress signals. 3 forward bases discovered completely abandoned, their garrisons found floating in space with precise surgical cuts through their environmental suits. The humans weren't just fighting, they were dissecting the hegemony's operational capabilities. With surgical precision, they're learning our patrol routes, reported Intelligence Coordinator Feldos, his crystalline form pulsing with nervous energy, adapting to our tactics faster than our predictive algorithms can compensate. Every engagement provides them with more data about our weapons, our ship designs, our command protocols. Vexthyra severed the neural link and stood, her elongated frame towering over the assembled war council. Around her, the greatest military minds of 36 species struggled to comprehend how a single world could hold off an armada that had conquered half the galaxy. What of our psychological warfare operations? She demanded. War Captain Merton of the Krell delegation activated his personal display, ineffective. We have transmitted recordings of the new Brasilia glassing to every human communications network. We have detailed exactly what awaits their civilians if they continue to resist. Their response has been unexpected. The display showed intercepted human communications military frequencies, civilian networks, even personal messages between families separated by the siege, instead of despair or surrender. The transmissions revealed something far more dangerous, absolute resolve hardened by careful preparation. They're not fighting to win, Vexthyra realized. They're fighting to make victory too expensive for us to afford. Captain Zoltha clicked his mandibles in agreement. My tactical analysis indicates they've restructured their entire civilization. Around extended conflict, their industrial bases have been dispersed and hardened. Their population centers have been converted into fortress complexes. They've transformed their species into a weapon specifically designed to bleed us dry. The strategic implications were staggering. The hegemony's expansion had always relied on overwhelming force applied quickly and decisively. They could afford to lose millions of soldiers and hundreds of ships in a brutal campaign, because victory meant acquiring the resources to replace those losses tenfold. But humanity offered no resources worth claiming, only an endless series of Pyrrhic victories that would cripple the hegemony's ability to maintain its empire. Recommend immediate escalation to planet killer status, suggested Coordinator Feldos. Deploy the void renders, turn their entire system into a debris field, and be done with this charade. The chamber fell silent. The void renders were the hegemony's ultimate weapons, massive constructs that could destabilize a star or tear apart a planet's gravitational field. They had been used only 3 times in the hegemony's history against civilizations that posed existential threats to galactic order. Vexthyra considered the option. It would be clean, final, and would send a message to any other species considering resistance. But it would also represent a fundamental admission of failure that humanity had forced the hegemony to destroy an entire system rather than conquer it. No, she decided. Deploy the Ravager fleets, full military escalation. I want every available ship transferred to Sol Sector within the next standard cycle. We will crush them through sheer overwhelming force. The orders went out within hours. Across hegemony space, battle fleets received priority redeployment commands. Dreadnoughts that had been pacifying rebellions in the outer spiral were recalled. Assault carriers that had been preparing for the next phase of galactic expansion were redirected. The hegemony's entire military apparatus began converging on the Sol system like a metal fist, closing around a beating heart. But intelligence flowed both ways across the void dot deep in the Titan shipyards, now hidden within the moon's restructured interior. Admiral Helena Cross studied the same data that had reached Vexthyra. Cross had been humanity's youngest admiral before the war, promoted to fleet command at 43 after demonstrating tactical brilliance during the Proxima incident. Now, at 45, she looked decades older, the weight of leading humanities. Desperate resistance had carved new lines around her eyes and turned her hair silver. How long do we have? She asked her intelligence chief, Colonel Marcus Webb. 3 weeks, maybe 4 before their main force arrives. Best estimates put it at over 800 capital ships, supported by approximately 4,000 escorts. At fighters, Cross nodded grimly. The numbers were overwhelming by any conventional measure. But humanity had stopped thinking conventionally months ago. They had spent 17 months preparing for exactly this moment, when the hegemony would finally commit everything to ending the siege, signal all deep patrol units, execute Samson Protocol, recall all raiders to prepared positions, and activate the Lazarus Array. Webb's face went pale. Helena, are you certain? Once we activate Lazarus, there's no going back. The power requirements alone will drain our reserves for months. Cross turned to stare at the tactical display showing Earth blue, and beautiful and utterly surrounded by the machinery of war. Somewhere on that planet, 5 billion people were going about their daily lives, growing food in underground hydroponics facilities, manufacturing ammunition in converted subway tunnels, raising children who had never seen unshielded sunlight. They deserved better than slow extinction. They deserved a chance to show the galaxy that humanity's patience had limits and that those limits, once crossed, revealed something far more terrible than rage. Activate Lazarus, she confirmed. It's time to teach the hegemony why we've been so willing to wait. The hegemony's grand armada materialized at the edge of the Sol system like a metallic storm front. 837 capital ships arranged in perfect battle formations that had conquered worlds across 3 galactic arms. Admiral Vexthyra stood on the command deck of her flagship Eternal Dominion, watching as tactical displays updated with targeted solutions for every human installation. Between Neptune and the Sun, all fleet commanders report status. She commanded through the neural link. The responses came in perfect synchronization. Krell assault groups ready to storm orbital platforms. Nixstar bomber wings prepared to glass population centers. Velmari energy cruisers charged to overload human power grids. The largest military force in galactic history, assembled for the specific purpose of teaching one stubborn species the price of defiance. Begin the final assault, Vexthyra ordered. All targets are authorized for immediate destruction. The armada surged forward, engines blazing across the electromagnetic spectrum as thousands of ships accelerated toward the inner system. Long-range sensors detected the expected human defensive positions, orbital fortresses around Earth, weapon platforms throughout the asteroid belt, mobile defense squadrons maintaining patrol routes that had become predictable after months of observation. Everything proceeded according to plan for exactly 17 minutes. The first indication of catastrophe came when the lead destroyer squadron, advancing toward Mars' orbit, simply vanished, not destroyed by weapons fire or consumed by explosions. They disappeared from all sensors simultaneously, as if they had never existed. Report, Vexthyra snapped, her neural implants blazing as she demanded information from the fleet network. A known energy signature detected throughout the system. Came the reply from her sensor coordinator. Massive gravitational anomalies forming at multiple points. Admiral, the humans have constructed something unprecedented. The tactical display updated with horrifying clarity. Humanity had spent 17 months not just fortifying their system, but rebuilding it. Hidden construction projects on dozens of moons and asteroids had created a network of gravitational manipulation devices, technology that the hegemony's greatest scientists had declared theoretically impossible for a species barely 2 centuries into space travel. They've weaponized space-time itself, whispered Captain Zolthik, his mandibles clicking in what might have been admiration or terror. The Lazarus Array activated in stages, each gravitational lens focusing stellar energy and local mass into precisely calculated distortions of reality. Hegemony's ships found themselves caught in impossible physics, pulled in multiple directions simultaneously, their hulls stretched and compressed beyond structural limits, their crews crushed by gravitational forces that fluctuated between 0 and 50 standard gravities in microsecond intervals. But the humans were in contact with exotic physics. Strike Group Alpha, led by Captain Brennan in his rebuilt Defiance Edge, emerged from Jupiter's shadow riding the bow wave of a gravitational pulse that accelerated them to near relativistic velocity. Their target was the hegemony's command cluster, the massive dreadnoughts and fleet carriers that formed the Armada's tactical center. The collision was visible from Earth as a second sun. Defiance Edge and 7 companion ships struck the hegemony formation at significant fractions of light speed, their kinetic energy exceeding the output of stellar flares. The Eternal Dominion shields collapsed instantly under the impossible impact, her hull rupturing along structural lines as atmosphere vented into space. In explosive decompression, Admiral Vexthyra felt her flagship dying around her as emergency bulkheads slammed shut and damage control teams struggled to contain cascading system failures. Through the neural link, she experienced the deaths of her fleet commanders' brief flashes of agony and confusion. As gravitational weapons tore their ships apart at the quantum level, all units, emergency withdrawal, she transmitted, abandoning centuries of military doctrine in the face of weapons that violated fundamental laws of physics. Retreat to minimum safe distance, but there was no safe distance. The Lazarus Array had turned the entire Sol system into a weapon, creating gravitational eddies and spatial distortions that made faster-than-light travel impossible. Ships that attempted to jump to hyperspace found themselves torn apart by dimensional shear. Their remains scattered across multiple layers of reality. The hegemony armada, trapped and outmaneuvered by enemies they had dismissed as primitive mammals, began to die in ways that would haunt survivors for generations. Krell warriors, bred for close combat, suffocated in the vacuum as their ships crumpled like paper. Nixstar pilots, masters of aerial warfare, watched helplessly as gravitational fields crushed their fighters into balls of compressed metal and organic matter. Admiral Helena Cross observed the carnage from her command center deep within Titan, where banks of quantum computers calculated gravitational trajectories and quantum field fluctuations in real time. The array was consuming power at rates that would drain Earth's entire industrial output within hours. But for those precious hours, humanity wielded forces that made them temporarily godlike. Phased to targets acquired, reported her tactical coordinator. Hegemony fleet concentration at grid 77 Alpha. Range 4.2 astronomical units. Cross studied the display, watching as the enemy formation attempted to regroup around their surviving capital ships. The hegemony's military doctrine emphasized overwhelming firepower and coordinated assault tactics that became meaningless when the battlefield itself could be manipulated. Execute Revelation Strike, she ordered. Throughout the system, gravitational lenses that had been carefully positioned over months of preparation focused there, accumulated energy on a single point. It spaced the geometric center of the hegemony's defensive formation. For one perfect moment, the combined mass of 3 asteroid belts was compressed into a sphere smaller than a marble, creating a localized singularity that bent space-time beyond recognition. The artificial black hole existed for less than a second before Hawking radiation caused it to evaporate in a burst of exotic particles and twisted space-time. But that second was enough to consume 47 hegemony capital ships and leave the survivors scattered across a debris field that stretched from Mars to Jupiter. Admiral Vexthyra, bleeding from neural feedback burns and struggling to comprehend the tactical situation, realized that humanity had accomplished something unprecedented in galactic history. They had turned patience into a weapon of mass destruction, and wading into warfare itself. The siege of Earth was over. The real war was just beginning. Admiral Vexthyra's neural implants screamed with damage reports as the remnants of her Grand Armada struggled to maintain formation in the gravitational chaos that the Sol system had become. 300 ships lost in the first hour, another 100 crippled and drifting, their crews either dead or dying in the void. The greatest military force in galactic history had been reduced to scattered survivors in less time than it took most worlds to surrender. But the hegemony had not conquered 47 worlds by accepting defeat easily. All remaining fleet commanders formed defensive spheres around our heavy assets. Vexthyra commanded through the tactical network. Maximum point defense deployment. Prepare for close quarters engagement. The surviving ships, nearly 400 capital vessels and twice as many escorts, pulled together into fortress formations that bristled with weapons. If humanity wanted to finish this fight, they would have to come within range of the hegemony's overwhelming firepower advantage. Admiral Cross watched from Titan as enemy formations solidified around the system's gravitational anomalies. The Lazarus Array had served its purpose, crippling the invasion fleet and demonstrating humanity's technological evolution. But the exotic weapons were already exhausting their power reserves. Soon, this would become a conventional battle, and in conventional battles, numbers still mattered. Signal all battle groups, cross-ordered. Execute final gambit. All ships, all crews, maximum engagement. From hidden bases throughout the system, humanity's rebuilt fleet emerged for the first time as a unified force. Gone were the converted civilian vessels and jury-rigged mining ships that had served as raiders. In their place came warships that had been designed from the ground up for one purpose: killing aliens in the most efficient manner possible. The UES Retribution led Battle Group Alpha, Her hull a matte black composite that absorbed sensor radiation and made targeting solutions nearly impossible. Captain Sarah HFY, formerly of the Merchant Marine, had supervised the ship's construction personally. After watching her original vessel die defending New Brasilia, every weapon system, every armor plate, every tactical system had been designed around the lessons learned in 17 months of desperate warfare. Behind her came 47 sister ships of the Vengeance-class humanity's answer to alien dreadnoughts. They were smaller than their hegemony counterparts, more vulnerable in direct confrontation, but they moved with a coordination that spoke of shared consciousness and perfect tactical integration. Enemy formation bearing to 7 Mark 8, reported Lieutenant Commander Yuki Nakamura, now serving as HFY's tactical coordinator. Krell Assault Group, 12 heavy cruisers with escort screen, Signal Battle Group Beta, execute Hammer Pattern 7. The human ships moved like a school of predatory fish, individual vessels weaving between each other in patterns that would have been impossible. Without perfect coordination, the Krell formation, expecting direct assault, found itself facing something unprecedented, an enemy that attacked from every direction simultaneously, while never presenting a concentrated target. The Retributions made guns railguns that fired projectiles at 30% of light speed punched through Krell shields and armor with contemptuous ease. The alien response was immediate and devastating. Plasma beams that could melt asteroids reaching out to embrace human ships in stellar fire. Captain Elena Vasquez died when her ship's Stubborn Defiance took a direct hit that vaporized her command deck, but not before her crew executed a ramming attack that crippled the Krell heavy cruisers. Commander Alexander Volkov's last hope survived long enough to deploy its suicide drones and manned fighters packed with antimatter warheads that sought out enemy ships with mechanical determination. The battle became a three-dimensional maze of energy beams, kinetic projectiles, and nuclear explosions that painted the void with deadly light. Human ships, smaller and more maneuverable, darted between alien formations like wolves harrying elephants, inflicting damage and withdrawing before the heavier enemy guns could track them effectively. But the hegemony's numerical advantage was overwhelming. For every alien ship destroyed, humanity lost 2 of their own. The mathematics of attrition were inexorable, and Admiral Cross watched her carefully hoarded fleet dissolving under the weight of superior firepower. Admiral called her communications officer were receiving priority signals from Earth Defense Command. The orbital platforms are requesting permission to engage. Cross hesitated. Earth's orbital defenses were humanity's last line of protection. Massive weapons platforms that had been built to defend the homeworld itself. Committing them to open battle would leave Earth vulnerable to direct assault, but her fleet was dying, and taking a few enemies with them, grant permission, all platforms, weapons free. Earth's orbital ring came alive with weapon signatures that dwarfed anything else in the system. Particle beams that drew power directly from the planet's fusion. Grid reached across millions of kilometers to touch hegemony ships with annihilating energy. Missile barrages erupted from concealed silos, filling space with thousands of nuclear warheads that overwhelmed alien point defense systems. Through sheer volume, the Nixstar bomber wings, attempting to exploit the gap created by humanity's fleet commitment, flew directly into a wall of defensive fire that turned them into expanding clouds of radioactive debris. Admiral Vexthyra watched 100 of her most experienced pilots die in seconds. They're organic fighters, no match for weapons designed to kill capital ships. Target the planet directly, she commanded. All dreadnoughts, focus fire on the orbital platforms. Burn them out of space. The response was immediate and massive. 30 hegemony dreadnoughts turned their main batteries toward Earth energies that could crack moons reaching across the void toward humanity's last refuge. Orbital platforms died in silent explosions as plasma beams punched through their shields and armor. Their crews vaporized instantly by temperatures that exceeded stellar cores. But for every platform destroyed, the humans extracted a terrible price. Captain Marcus Webb, commanding the defense grid from Luna Base, coordinated counter-battery fire that reached into the hegemony formations like the fist of an angry god. His targeting solutions were perfect, his timing flawless, and his weapons had been built for exactly this moment. The dreadnought Selthara died when 3 particle beams struck her reactor core. Simultaneously, the resulting explosion visible from Mars as a brief new star. The carrier Velthros followed minutes later, her fighter bays erupting in chain reactions as human missiles penetrated her defensive screens. By the end of the 8-hour engagement, the space around Earth resembled a graveyard of twisted metal and cooling plasma. Humanity had lost over 100 ships and 4 to 7 orbital platforms. The hegemony had lost 300 capital ships and nearly all of their escort vessels. Admiral Cross surveyed the tactical display and realized that both fleets had been bled white. The question now was which side could afford to continue the slaughter, and which would break first under the weight of their own casualties. The answer would determine not just the fate of Earth, but the future of galactic civilization itself. In the depths of Titan, Admiral Helena Cross stood before a tactical display that painted the Sol system in shades of devastation. Debris fields marked the graves of 1,000 ships, human and alien alike, while the survivors maneuvered through gravitational anomalies that made conventional navigation a deadly gamble. Her fleet had been reduced to 73 operational vessels. The hegemony retained nearly 200. The mathematics were clear. Humanity was losing. "Admiral," reported Colonel Webb, his voice tight with exhaustion after 18 hours of continuous battle coordination. "Earth Defense Command is requesting immediate evacuation protocols. The remaining orbital platforms can't withstand another concentrated assault." Cross studied the display, watching as hegemony formations slowly reorganized around their surviving dreadnoughts. Admiral Vexthyra had proven herself a capable commander, adapting to humanity's unconventional tactics and finding ways to leverage her remaining numerical advantage. Another direct engagement would finish what remained of Earth's defenses. Negative. On evacuation, Cross decided, signal all remaining ships, execute Protocol Omega. The bridge fell silent. Protocol Omega was humanity's final contingency, a plan so desperate that it had been classified beyond top secret, known only to a handful of senior commanders. It represented the absolute limit of human ingenuity, desperation, and moral flexibility. "Admiral," Webb said quietly, "Omega will require us to sacrifice every remaining ship, every crew. There won't be survivors." Cross nodded, her expression carved from stone. At 45, she had spent 2 years watching humanity's children die in a war they never started, fighting enemies who saw them as nothing more than stubborn animals to be exterminated. The weight of command had aged her decades, but it had also shown her exactly how far humans would go to protect their own. "Signal Captain Chen Okafor on Retribution. Tell her it's time." Throughout the remaining human fleet, sealed orders were opened and final preparations began. In the bowels of each ship, engineering crews activated systems that had been installed in secret during the frantic reconstruction months. Quantum resonance chambers that had been disguised as standard fusion reactors. Exotic matter reservoirs that appeared to be simple fuel tanks. Computer cores running calculations that would have been considered theoretical impossibilities. Just 2 years ago, humanity's scientists had learned much from studying hegemony technology, recovered from destroyed ships. They had learned even more from studying the fundamental forces that held reality together, and how those forces might be temporarily redirected for catastrophic effect. Admiral Vexthyra is moving her remaining forces into final assault formation, reported the tactical coordinator. They'll be in optimal firing position in 4 to 7 minutes. Cross activated the fleet-wide communication channel, knowing that her words would be the last many of these crews would ever hear. Throughout the system, on ships named Defiant, Unbreakable, Never Again, and dozens of others, human beings prepared to transform themselves into weapons of mass destruction. "This is Admiral Cross to all ships. In 17 months of siege, you have proven that humanity cannot be broken by fear, cannot be conquered by superior numbers, and cannot be defeated by enemies who mistake our patience for weakness. Today, we show them what we learned while we waited." The response came from 73 ships simultaneously, thousands of voices speaking in perfect unison. "For Earth, for humanity, for every world that dreams of freedom." Captain Chen Okafor's hands moved across her control console with mechanical precision, activating systems that would turn Retribution into something unprecedented in galactic warfare. Around her, the bridge crew worked with calm efficiency, their faces showing the same expression of absolute resolve that had carried humanity through 2 years of hell. "Quantum resonance at 93%, reported her engineering chief. Exotic matter injection steady. Temporal distortion field generators online. Signal all ships. Begin final approach." The human fleet moved toward the hegemony formation. With the steady inevitability of a falling star, there was no deception now. No clever tactics or surprise attacks. Just 73 ships flying directly into the weapons range of 200 alien dreadnoughts, accepting certain destruction in pursuit of something far more important than survival. Admiral Vexthyra watched the human approach with growing confusion. Her tactical computers could find no logical explanation for this behavior. The human ships were outnumbered, outgunned, and moving into a tactical position that guaranteed their annihilation. Either humanity's commanders had finally succumbed to desperation, or they were attempting something beyond hegemony understanding. All ships, prepare to engage, she commanded. Maximum firepower concentration, and this charade. The space between the fleets erupted in weapons fire, as 200 hegemony ships unleashed their accumulated fury against the approaching human vessels. Plasma beams that could boil oceans reach across the void to embrace human ships in stellar fire. Kinetic rounds moving at relativistic velocity punched through armor and hull plating with the force of nuclear weapons. Stubborn truth died first, her hull cracking along stress lines as Krell plasma cannons vaporized her forward sections. Last hope followed seconds later, her reactor core breached by a direct hit that turned her into a brief supernova. One by one, the human ships were systematically destroyed by firepower that no conventional fleet could hope to withstand. But as each ship died, something extraordinary happened. The quantum resonance chambers that had been hidden within their hulls activated at the moment of destruction, converting the total mass energy of each vessel into exotic particles that followed rules of physics known only to humanity's most desperate scientists. Instead of exploding conventionally, the human ships imploded into microscopic singularities that immediately began consuming surrounding space-time. What are they doing? Vexthyra demanded as her sensors registered impossible readings from the expanding field of temporal distortions. They're weaponizing their own deaths, whispered Captain Zolthic, his mandibles clicking in what might have been horror or admiration. The 73 singularities created by the human fleet's sacrifice began to interact with each other according to calculations that had required the combined processing power of every computer on Earth. Gravitational fields merged and amplified, creating a cascade effect that turned local space-time into a weapon of unimaginable destructive potential. The hegemony fleet found itself trapped within an expanding bubble of distorted reality, where the laws of physics had been temporarily rewritten by human desperation and scientific brilliance. Ships that had survived the Battle of New Brasilia and the conquest of a dozen worlds were torn apart at the quantum level as the fundamental forces that held matter together were systematically disrupted. Admiral Vexthyra felt her flagship Eternal Dominion beginning to disintegrate around her as exotic particles invaded the ship's hull and began converting organized matter into chaotic energy. Through the neural link, she experienced the deaths of her remaining fleet commanders, not the quick violence of weapons fire, but the slow horror of molecular dissolution as reality itself turned hostile. Emergency jump to high for space, she commanded, but her navigation officer's response was delivered through vocal cords that were already beginning to unravel. Unable to comply, Admiral, dimensional barriers are compromised. Hyperspace access impossible. The trap was perfect. Humanity had spent 17 months learning exactly how hegemony technology worked, studying captured devices and analyzing battlefield recordings to understand the fundamental principles that enabled faster-than-light travel. The quantum resonance field didn't just distort local space-time, it created an interdimensional prison that made escape impossible. In the final moments before the Eternal Dominion was consumed by forces that existed beyond conventional physics, Admiral Vexthyra understood what humanity had achieved. They had transformed their own extinction into a weapon that would reshape galactic history, proving that some species were willing to pay any price to defend their freedom. The expanding field of quantum disruption consumed the remaining hegemony fleet over the course of 6 hours, each ship dying in ways that violated fundamental understanding of how matter and energy behaved. When the exotic effects finally dissipated, leaving space-time to heal itself through processes that would take decades to complete, the Sol system contained only debris and radiation, and Earth, blue and beautiful and utterly alone, continued its patient orbit around a star that had witnessed the birth of gods. 6 months after the Battle of Sol, Ambassador Kethver of the Hegemony Council stood in the observation deck of the diplomatic vessel Reconciliation, staring at the blue-white marble that had cost his civilization everything. The planet looked peaceful from this distance, its orbital infrastructure rebuilt, and its cities glowing with the warm light of continued human habitation. It showed no sign of the apocalyptic battle that had consumed entire fleets, and announced humanity's arrival as a galactic power. Beside him, Admiral Helena Cross, now bearing the title of Earth's first galactic defense commander, watched the same view with eyes that had seen too much death and carried too many memories of friends who would never see this moment. At 46, her hair was completely silver, and her face bore the kind of lines that came from making decisions that saved billions of lives at the cost of thousands. Your government's terms are generous, HFY admitted, his crystalline features reflecting the starlight that streamed through the observation ports. Considering what your species proved itself capable of, Cross nodded without taking her eyes off Earth. The peace negotiations had lasted for months, complicated by the fact that humanity had effectively demonstrated their ability to destroy any fleet sent against them, regardless of size or technological superiority. The hegemony's remaining member species had been forced to confront an uncomfortable truth. They were no longer the apex predators of the galaxy. We never wanted to be conquerors, Cross said quietly. We just wanted to be left alone. The final treaty, signed 3 days ago in the rebuilt halls of the United Nations, established terms that would have been unthinkable before the siege. Humanity would be granted full sovereign status over a fifth to light-year sphere around Sol, with guaranteed independence and non-interference clauses that were enforced by the implicit threat of what had happened to the Grand Armada. In exchange, Earth would share selected technologies with the hegemony's member species, medical advances, agricultural techniques, and other innovations that could improve life throughout the galaxy without providing military advantages. Your Captain Chenokifer, HFY said, referring to the human officer who had led the treaty negotiations. She mentioned that your people have a saying, speak softly and carry a big stick. I confess I find human philosophy illuminating. Cross smiled for the first time in months. Sarah Chenokifer had survived the final battle by virtue of being reassigned to diplomatic duties. Just days before Protocol Omega was executed, she had proven as skilled at negotiating peace as she had been at waging war, demonstrating the same patience and strategic thinking that had characterized humanity's entire approach to the conflict. We have another saying, Cross replied. The best way to win a war is to make sure you never have to fight it. We spent 17 months teaching you that lesson. The observation deck's communication system chimed softly, announcing an incoming transmission from Earth. Cross activated the display, revealing the face of President Martinez, a woman who had been elected during the siege and had overseen humanity's transformation from a single-world species to the galaxy's newest superpower. Admiral Cross, Ambassador HFY, Martinez said, her voice carrying across the void with crystal clarity. I wanted to personally inform you that the Sol Defense Grid has been officially activated. We are prepared to fulfill our end of the treaty obligations. The Sol Defense Grid represented the culmination of everything humanity had learned during the siege, a network of gravitational manipulation devices, quantum resonance generators, and exotic matter reservoirs that could transform the entire solar system into an impregnable fortress within hours. It was powered by technologies that the hegemony's greatest scientists were still struggling to understand, maintained by crews who had learned to wage war against the fundamental forces of reality itself. More importantly, it was a demonstration that humanity's patience had not been weakness, but preparation. Every day of the siege had been spent building toward this moment, when Earth would never again face the threat of invasion, because the cost of attacking it would exceed any conceivable benefit. The grid is magnificent, HFY admitted, but I find myself wondering what your species will do now that the immediate threat has passed. You have proven yourselves capable of building weapons that reshape reality itself. How do we know you won't use them for conquest? Cross turned to face the alien ambassador, her expression serious but not unkind. Behind her, through the observation port, Earth continued its ancient rotational world that had never been conquered, would never be conquered, and now possessed the means to extend that protection to any species that desired it. Because conquest was never the point, she said. We didn't build those weapons to rule the galaxy. We built them to make sure no one else could rule us. There's a difference that I hope your people will remember. The implications were clear to anyone who understood strategic thinking. Humanity had demonstrated that they possessed defensive capabilities that made them effectively unconquerable. But they had also shown remarkable restraint in how they chose to use their newfound power. Instead of demanding tribute or territory, they had negotiated for peace and offered to share beneficial technologies freely. Your species has taught the galaxy an important lesson, HFY acknowledged, that patience, properly applied, can be more dangerous than fury. I believe this will be remembered for millennia to come. 3 days later, the diplomatic vessel departed Sol System, carrying news of humanity's victory to civilizations throughout the galaxy. The story would spread through trade networks and diplomatic channels, becoming legend even as it remained historical fact. How a single world had held off the greatest military force in galactic history, not through superior weapons or brilliant tactics, but through absolute patience and the willingness to wait for the perfect moment to reveal what they had been building while their enemies dismissed them as primitive mammals. In the years that followed, dozens of species would seek alliance with Earth, drawn by the promise of protection from a people who had proven that some things were worth any sacrifice to defend. The hegemony would survive, but transformed no longer an empire built on fear and overwhelming force, but a confederation of equals who had learned that cooperation produced better results than conquest. And Earth, blue and beautiful and eternal, would continue its patient orbit around the sun, home to a species that had discovered the most powerful weapon in the universe. Was not rage or hatred or superior technology, but the simple willingness to wait as long as necessary for freedom, to triumph over tyranny. The galaxy would remember the lesson for 1,000 generations. They had feared Earth's rage, but they had never expected its patience, and in the end, it was patience that had saved not just humanity, but the dream that all species, no matter how small or isolated, possessed: the inherent right to determine their own destiny among the stars.